everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Ghoul Guides Association. My name is Lauren,
And I'm Mary.
and we are the Ghoul Guides. And this is the fourth episode of our little spooky mini series all about true crime and the supernatural and real life horror and that lovely big intersection between pop culture and the Gothic. So, today's episode is going to be all about the darker side of dark tourism. And I know what you're thinking, Lauren, it's dark tourism. How does it get darker than dark tourism? Well, let me tell you, it does, and it's not great. But we're going to have some fun talking about it today. So, that is the topic for today's episode. But before we dive straight in, how you doing, Mary? Going?
Yeah, doing good. Just trundling along, I guess.
Trundling? Yeah.
Trundling.
What a word. Trundling.
How are you, Dr. Nixon?
I am okay, thank you. I'm doing good. Not a lot to report. Although, did you see the news today? There has been an update in infamous unsolved cold case, the JonBenet Ramsey murder case. They have finally retested the DNA that was found under JonBenet's fingernails, and I think somewhere else, and it does not indicate any of the family members, which is really interesting because that's a theory that has been, back and forth for a really, really long time. So, we started this series by talking about solved, unsolved mysteries, and it might be that by the time this episode comes out, there may well be an update on the JonBenet Ramsey case.
I hadn't seen that. No, that's fascinating.
Yeah,
and it just goes to show
afternoon.
that these cases, especially like cold cases or unsolved mysteries, they're not necessarily always going to be unsolved.
Exactly.
Fascinating.
So that's a really exciting development, and I think a case that a lot of people would be quite excited and pleased to see some updates in. So stay tuned for that one. But yeah, I just thought, gosh, how interesting that we've been doing, stuff about like true crime and our obsession with true crime, and that came out this afternoon. So stay tuned on that one. But today we are talking about dark tourism. So
I am very excited for this episode.
Thanks, me too. Because dark tourism is something, well, what do you think of as dark tourism?
So for me, when you say that, I just immediately think of Jack the Ripper tours, because not so much now, but I used to be in and out of London quite a lot. And the train stations that I would go to would be Tower Hill and Fenchurch Street, which are walkable, and walking between those stations you'd always see signs or crowds of people waiting to go on a Jack the Ripper tour. I was in London the other day, I literally saw another one of these tours. And I find it weird. I guess it's interesting, and a part of me is like, I kind of want to go, but also they take the Jack the Ripper tours in particular. And I know we talked about Jack the Ripper in your true crime episode, but it's kind of like they take you to all the places where the bodies of the women were found, and it's quite dark, shall we say?
So dark tourism, like, it's something I think I personally do find a little bit difficult because on the one hand, I love a haunted ghost tour. You and I, this is something we share. When we went to Chicago, our favorite thing that we did was we went on this bus tour around Chicago, and the guide pointed out all of the locations where, supposedly where the demon baby was, and that's where H.H. Holmes's hotel was, and that's where the Valentine's Day massacre happened. And obviously, yes, a lot of those places are the actual sites of real horrendous things. And you did have a bit of you that was like, oh, icky, why am I so excited about this? But that was also mixed in with a lot of history, a lot of perspective. We learned a lot about, the darker side of Chicago and, America as a nation and how things have developed. And it was very illuminating and not so much like blood and gore and guts. But dark tourism essentially is tourism that focuses on the morbid or the macabre. So that covers pretty much anything from visiting sites of like prisons and executions to things like Auschwitz, to the Holocaust Memorial, to Ground Zero. So there's quite a big spectrum here. And in 2018, the term dark tourism and the idea of dark tourism became really popular with the Netflix series, New Zealand produced series called Dark Tourist, which I don't know. Have you seen that?
I haven't. No.
So
I mean, it sounds like I should.
yeah,
For obvious reasons.
I really like the guy that presents it, and I think he's really good. I think, you know, like there's one bit where he goes to, I think it's like Pablo Escobar's um like plantation. And he does point out the icky stuff, and he's like, that's not really chill. Don't think we should be promoting that stuff. And there's also a really great episode where he goes to Mexico and he looks into Santa Muerte. Cat sighting.
Yeah, I just saw.
And he explores the cult of Santa Muerte, which is a great episode. And for the most part, he does it with a lot of what I would call very sensitive, research-based perspective. It's a good show. Dark tourism isn't always that, and that's why we've kind of put the little brackets ER on the end of this episode and called it dark tourism, for want of a better term.
I think as well, before you move on to what I know you'll be talking about, I think, yeah, Auschwitz is part of dark tourism, but I think it's not part of the kind of subsection that we'll be talking about. And I think it absolutely is really valuable for people to go and to see those places, and to reflect and to remember. And I think it's this, you know, it's the same with places like Ground Zero. I remember when I went to New York for a college trip, college in the UK system being, you know, when you're 16, 17, 18, before you go to university. And I was surrounded, you know, went with a bunch of teenage lads, essentially. And
it's the Skins era. For those of you that aren't UK based, you might be familiar with Skins. College is when we're in our Skins era.
Yeah. And our politics teacher, you know, said you've got a free afternoon. I sometimes take classes to Ground Zero, but you know, you can go if you want, but you don't have to. You've got a free afternoon. And we actually all ended up going on our own, because I think even for 16, 17, 18-year-old lads and girls, it's I think these spaces are you know, important memorials, especially as kind of spaces that are quite recent, in that way. Whereas the spaces that you'll be talking about, or the way that they're framed, or the specific types and aspects of tourism and the tourists, are maybe not exactly the same as you know, people that are visiting Auschwitz or or places like that. And I think that it is important to distinguish, you know, something like Jack the Ripper, which is, I guess, more historical, or things like Auschwitz and Ground Zero, which are more about, like, you know, recent memory, and collective trauma.
It's kind of that thing
with
of, like,
what you
social
will also be talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Like, what's important to our education, what's important to our social consciousness. We know that there's an issue when we erase certain things from history and we don't maintain a continued memory of the trauma, for example. So dark tourism is kind of a fraught concept, but mostly it's in the same vein as the true crime genre. Although some spaces do Disneyfy things, they sometimes whitewash the history or glamorize it. For the most part, most dark tourism, quote unquote, is about remembering terrible things that happened and making sure to be, you know, self-educated and taking time for remembrance and reflection. Or it is sort of this place is supposedly haunted. So some, the haunted hotel we went to in Chicago, we weren't actually, nothing actually happened there. There is not some gruesome thing that supposedly happened. It's just meant to be haunted, and I think it inspired Stephen King when he was writing The Shining. So more of like, cool and spooky. This is cool and spooky and fun, without that kind of layer. There is this offshoot that is pretty problematic, and I have sort of, branded it the serial killer and supernatural level of dark tourism, because some supernatural dark tourism is absolutely fine. I don't think it's problematic at all. I do have some ethical issues with what I see as people taking advantage of people who do believe in the supernatural, financially. But it's often all in good nature and all in good fun. But there is this much darker subset, which I think you and I have come up against a couple of times just in our personal lives when we've been out and about places. I actually used to work in a prison museum that also has a side hustle as like a haunted location, and I always felt really weird about the fact that we'd be doing like ghost tours where we jumped out and scared people in this location where people were tortured and executed. Like, part of it was a really great museum. It did such a good job of balancing the kind of like macabre fun side of crime and punishment with the real deeper, social egalitarian issues. But yeah, the ghost tours, I always felt a little bit weird about them. Like chasing someone around pretending to clank chains in like an actual form of prison. A little bit weird.
I think there's also with like ghost tours, and I'm not gonna specify a city, because I think if I did, it would become very obvious which ghost tour I was talking about. So we'll just say like some city in England. You and I went on a specific ghost tour.
Yes,
we've been on a few ghost tours. I'm trying to be vague because I don't. I think it's fine. What I enjoy about ghost tours and what you enjoy about them is often it's part history and then part creativity, where you get to hear about how places create narratives around ghosts and hauntings. But it's odd how often the ghosts end up being just someone who will, often a man who will be like pinching someone's bum, and I'm just like, is that a ghost, or is that maybe just an actual man who is doing that?
Why are all
or you often or
sometimes
sometimes
sexual predators?
yeah, and sometimes you get you're listening to a bit of history on this ghost tour and you're like, no, that's not even remotely true.
Not even close to true.
And I think that there is a difference between folk stories, ghost stories that have kind of been created and emerged just through communities, and then just someone who is making something up. I mean, I guess I can appreciate the grift.
So we will be talking about grift. But it's that thing again, like about the responsibility of what you create. There's a difference between a Gothic campness, where you're creating stories inspired by a location, to presenting something as a true story. And if those people do believe in the supernatural, presenting that as, doubly true, because there's also a ghost here. It's like, not only is the story not true, I don't personally think there is a ghost, but you've also now almost taken advantage of that person's beliefs because the story's not true, which means the ghost is automatically not true because the story is not true. So yeah, it's a bit
and we talked about this a little bit in the end of in the last episode, where you have that blurring of the line between what's real and what's fiction. And I think that in this specific kind of subset of dark tourism, there is that line where it's like, are you doing it for grift? And I understand that everyone's got to eat, but also like you have to be conscious of not moving into unethical territory, I guess.
There's a difference between being a creator and being a con artist. Like, it can be a fine line, but it's there. And
Yeah.
these people, I think, cross that line. They cross that line heavily. So I'm actually going to talk about two people. And the reason I'm talking about them is because they are hugely influential in creating this brand of this kind of subsection of dark tourism. But to really understand why and how, we need to understand who they were. So, may I please introduce to you Ed and Lorraine Warren, she says with a deep sigh.
Yeah. And again, we kind of talked about them a little bit in the last episode. So if you haven't seen real life horror, the ethics and the icks, we end with just a little kind of, we touch a little bit on Ed and Lorraine Warren, but in relation to the Conjuring franchise. But as I'm sure you're going to dive into, the actual people and the reason why the Conjuring franchise is so difficult, I think sometimes, is because the real people are quite controversial.
Yeah. I have no love for Ed and Lorraine Warren, and I'm sure it will become evident why. But who were they? Okay, so Ed and Lorraine Warren are, let's be honest, two of the most famous paranormal investigators of the 20th and 21st century. So Ed was born in 1926, Lorraine was born in 1927. According to them, and definitely orchestrated meet cute story, they met when they were 16, and they were married pretty much all their lives. Ed died in 2006 and Lorraine died in 2019. So this couple, as you said, Mary, were the inspiration for the Conjuring franchise. They have also been the inspiration for a lot of pop culture, and they have also inspired, I would say, probably the ghost hunting genre. So even though Ed and Lorraine themselves, we're talking kind of pre-reality TV, they were one of the first to be putting out their own books, publishing their research, going on talk shows, inserting themselves into these narratives. But why could they do this? Like, how did they get? Because this is the thing about Ed and Lorraine. I don't want to say they had legitimacy. They constructed legitimacy for themselves. And they did this by creating an organization called NESPA. And NESPA is the New England Society for Psychic. Yes, psychic, not paranormal. I always think it's paranormal, but it's not. It's psychic. So the New England Society for Psychic Research in 1952. And it's still one of the preeminent paranormal investigation societies. They claim to have thousands of members, everything from clergymen to doctors and lawyers, which I always find interesting that cults do this too. Like, oh, we have like lawyers and doctors and clergymen. I said clerics, didn't I? God, that's my D&D brain coming through.
It's
They
the same.
technically are clerics.
Yeah.
And they think they have magic powers, some of them. So yeah, they it's undeniable that they are huge. It's a huge organization founded by Ed and Lorraine, and it continues to be a recognizable name of quite some significance.
And this wasn't a new thing.
No.
Paranormal investigations have been, I think they really started in the Victorian period, I guess, where you had that kind of emergence of mediums and psychics and all of this kind of stuff, and then people wanted to investigate that. So you had people investigating mediums and seances and all this kind of stuff. Obviously, investigating paranormal phenomenon has existed for millennia as well. I think Augustine Calmet is a really good example of a Catholic monk who investigated, do vampires exist? Do ghosts exist?
Yeah.
But what Ed and Lorraine did was they created their own kind of society, and then they also, like you say, ran a media dynasty, as it were, where they used this organization, and as I'm sure we'll come to it, a kind of legitimacy afforded to them by the Catholic Church, kind of through the back door. But also then their TV appearances, the fact that they were going to all these places. They
Mm-hmm.
all always got involved in really high profile cases. So if there was something in the news
They
that was
inserted themselves.
that was catching like the kind of public attention,
Mm-hmm.
then they were there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, as we briefly mentioned last time, they were involved in multiple high profile investigations, including the Annabelle the Doll case. If you don't know about Annabelle the Doll, it is a Raggedy Ann doll. It doesn't look half as scary as it does in the movie, which I actually think makes it scarier. The real Annabelle the Doll is creepier because it's got that weird, like, embroidered vacant face. But supposedly this girl was given this doll by her mother. She was like a nurse in her 20s. I always thought this was really weird. The doll supposedly started, moving around at night. Bad things started happening. It supposedly cursed the roommate's boyfriend. There was a stigmata. Ed and Lorraine Warren end up getting involved, and they take the doll with them. It's now in a glass box in a location I will explain shortly. As we talked about last time, they were involved in the Amityville case and the Enfield haunting, the Enfield poltergeist. They were involved in high profile murder cases, and they were also involved in the case of the Perrin family. And I'll remember that name because I'm going to return to that a little bit later, because the Perrin family is a really good example of why Ed and Lorraine Warren's grift was so problematic. But they are the celebrity, the high profile paranormal investigators. Now, as Mary mentioned, one of the things that gave them legitimacy was their connection to the Catholic Church. They were both devout Catholics, and they had this big thing about religion, and their comeback to a lot of their detractors was, well, they don't believe in God. They do not have faith, they do not believe in God, and if you don't have God, you don't believe in the presence of God, then of course you don't believe in the supernatural. So really interestingly, their blend of religion and the supernatural, now this is nothing new. Catholic mysticism is a thing. you know Demons exist in the Bible, or at least certain versions of it. There is this idea that if we take the Bible and the things that happen in the Bible, then a certain amount of magic and mysticism must be possible. And it's not the only religion that has that. Islam and Judaism both have elements of mysticism.
There's also I mean, it's especially Roman Catholicism.
Mm-hmm.
I guess also Christianity to a differing extent, but there's lots of readings of Catholicism that views it not as a monotheistic faith, but as a
pantheon.
Pantheon. Yeah, because you have all of these characters and demigods through the saints who you can call upon, who work mystery, miracles and all of these kinds of things, like actual things in real life, and they're fighting demons and evil spirits and all of these kinds of things. So yeah, that whole idea of Catholic mysticism, and also to an extent just Christian mysticism,
Yes.
with the idea that there are other beings, namely the Satan figure, but this idea of evil being out there, and
and evil having
the world is in
like a mystical, magical manifestation that people can unintentionally or intentionally invite into their lives. So Ed claimed to be a demonologist, and he was very Frankensteinian about his identity as a demonologist. So he was somebody who read, instead of having a set education, he was like, no, I educate myself. And he kind of picked and chose, which we often, go, oh, wow, this person's self-educated. And I have nothing wrong with self-education. Self-education is beautiful. It's wonderful. But there's the self-education that the creature does and the self-education that Frankenstein does. One of those things is not like the other. When you pick and choose and you purposefully ignore things that contradict or do not fit with your teachings or your beliefs, that's problematic. And that's what Ed Warren did. So his whole thing about him being a demonologist, like, it was heavily founded in religious texts and theology, and in many ways like ordained and approved by the Catholic Church, but he was also picking and choosing from stuff that, you know, we generally believe to have been a hoax or to have been, you know, the ravings of a madman or X, Y, and Z. So he created essentially his own demonology concept and mythos, which, as we know from people like Aleister Crowley, does add to the celebrity, because instead of people being like, he's a fraud or he doesn't know what he's talking about, they're like, oh, he's so brilliant that he's the first person to put this all together. And he definitely had a bit of that cult of charisma thing going on. Although not that looks matter. Looks do not matter. Did not look like Patrick Wilson, and nothing close. Like,
no.
I mean, what a freaking glow up that was not deserved. I know I said this last time, but come on. Anyway.
I said this as well, you know, casting someone as sexy as Patrick Wilson.
It's not okay.
Ed Warren is so.
I mean, it makes sense.
It's like the casting of Margaret Thatcher in
The Crown.
Yeah. I think a lot of people were a bit conflicted by that.
Well, you know that I was extremely upset by the casting of John Lee Miller in The Crown, because
that's another one.
I didn't like it. It upset me because he's still attractive. He's still Johnny Lee Miller. I don't ever want to feel that way about former Prime Minister. Don't worry.
But I mean, as recent politics have shown, cult of personalities are not dependent upon looks.
Nope.
And
charisma is a big thing, and draw. And the thing that people have always found very difficult about the Warrens is where the belief stopped and the grift began. Because they definitely believed in it to a certain extent. But there is things like, once a ghostwriter who was hired to work on one of their books, Ed basically told him to make it up. So we know that they knew to a certain extent that they were full of shit. But they did also believe it, and it's you get this with cults, you get this with, you know, other like so-called prophets and things like that. Where does the grift end, and where does the belief begin? So yeah, he was a demonologist, and she was supposedly a clairvoyant. So Lorraine supposedly had a spiritual affinity. She was clairvoyant. She could communicate, and between the two of them, they of course made the perfect paranormal investigation team, because he presented himself very academically. So when you think of like the Doctor in The Haunting of Hill House, I'm fairly sure that's who he based himself on. Or was, I mean, it's different. I'm not sure how the timelines overlap, but obviously Jackson is slightly before. But yeah, he really gave off like a very academic vibe. And I think by founding the society, and they had journals and research and they had case files, they really presented themselves as, you know, researchers and investigators in the same way as an academic would be.
Yeah, it's using the language and the terminology and the mechanisms of scientific legitimacy and academic legitimacy. Those kinds of ways of presenting their work as research and through case files and all of that kind of, you know, all of those items.
Yeah. And, you know, I know we're academics, but it just goes to show as well that it's like, you know, when you stick somebody in like a tuxedo or you put someone in a soldier's jacket, there are certain elements of costuming, so to speak, that when you put someone in them, all of a sudden people are like, that person knows what they're talking about. And I think that's definitely what Ed Warren was doing. But
and I mean, Milgram's famous study about the doctors and the volunteers, where a volunteer was told, you know, in a kind of lab setting, you're in one of those kinds of spaces where you can see into another room, and there was somebody tied to a chair that had like electrodes connected to it, and they were told you have to turn up the dial in your room to the point where the person in the other room would start screaming in pain, and you'd see the kind of safe like indicator on the valve, and they were told, keep turning up. They actually weren't connected, and the person in the other room was an actor, but the volunteer who was turning the dials, didn't know that.
Yep.
And they found that, especially when you had someone who was dressed like a doctor,
they do as they're told.
The volunteers would just do what they were told, because that kind of, like you said, costuming, and whether it's academic or medical or religious, it confers some kind of authority that is not necessarily earned.
There's a reason that a lot of cult leaders appropriate religious hierarchies and religious terminologies.
Yeah.
So, okay, why are we talking about the Warrens in this situation? It's not just because I wanted to, diss Ed Warren from Beyond the Grave. As we kind of touched on last time, the Warrens were involved in the Amityville case. And when I say involved, they mostly just inserted themselves into it. They literally turned up and they were like, hey, we'll organize, we'll investigate for you. But as Mary talked about in the last episode, the first Amityville film only came out about 6 or 7 years after the actual supposed Amityville haunting. So not only did Ed and Lorraine get prominence while the supposed haunting was happening, they also got real famous when the first Amityville film came out. And Ed Warren freaking loved this. He loved the fame. This, absolutely catapulted them. Not only did they become automatically connected with this famous haunting, with this high-profile haunting, it, again, gave a certain amount of legitimacy. Because it was like, this is based on a true story. And because the Catholic Church had been involved, supposedly, although as you said, they later retracted it, but because there was this connection, and because the priests, I think, to an extent, were like, oh yes, call in Ed and Lorraine, these devout Catholic investigators.
I think this is the relationship that Ed and Lorraine Warren had with the Catholic Church. They were friendly with certain priests, and as we discussed in the Annalise Michelle case, the Catholic Church is quite reticent to say, yes, this is a haunting or this is a possession. And they are also quite happy to retract those claims. So what they would do, and I think Ed and Lorraine used this, was in cases where the Catholic Church didn't want to legitimize a case or to step in an official capacity,
they basically send the Warrens.
They would send the Warrens, or the Warrens would get in touch and use the Catholic priests as a way to make the people that, whose houses they were investigating feel more at ease with them, because it's like, here's my friends from the church. So it is that kind of, with the Catholic Church, it's one, we don't want to do anything, so I guess you can, but also we can't do anything, so please you do something. It's very much that kind of, I think everyone was trying to make the best out of the situation for what they believed, or from what they wanted.
Exactly. And Ed and Lorraine, one of the things that they always did to try and give themselves more legitimacy and to kind of legitimize the stories is they did not take payment. So they would turn up, and they did hundreds of cases. They would turn up, invited or uninvited, and they would not take payment from the people that they were supposedly helping. So on the surface, that looks very charitable. It looks very earnest and honest. Why would they do that unless they fully believed it? The thing is, they were all about the grift. They were grift personified. Yes, they did not take any money from these poor people who believed they might be haunted, or, as I'll get to in a moment, the Warrens convinced them to believe they may be haunted. They did get money from the TV appearances, from the invitations to do talks, from the book deals, from eventually people visiting their home where they designed a museum. Ed and Lorraine made an empire, a media empire out of this. They became celebrities and they got paid. Like, these people were not short of money. They weren't like rolling around. They're not like the Scooby Gang or the Winchester brothers just rolling around in their vehicle and, making ends meet. They grifted on that celebrity status and they got paid. Just because they weren't taking money from the people does not mean they were not getting paid. And this is where it starts to get really problematic for me, because they used their demonology, ghosts haunting bullshit to like reinforce conservative values. And this is not just something that the Conjuring movies inserted or transposed onto Ed and Lorraine Warren. Ed used to be like, yes, you invited the devil onto yourself. Because you are a smoker, a drinker, unmarried, because you're thinking of leaving your husband, you have brought the evil into yourself. So they were really, really hardcore on the conservative Christian. And yes, they were specifically Catholic, but we are talking about America in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. They were hardcore reinforcing those values. And I don't think it's any coincidence that they come at the same time as Reaganism, they come at the same time as the Satanic Panic. And I know I mention it all the time, but like, they definitely used their legitimacy, so to speak, as these famed supernatural investigators, as connections to the Catholic Church, as devout Catholics. Yes, the reason this is happening, and it's happening because you have invited it in on yourself. And this essentially is what they were doing. Ed sometimes would like sketch houses or like have visions of places, and then they'd go to that place and be like, hello, your house is haunted, would you like us to investigate it? And convince those people that they had a haunting, and that the way to get rid of it was to put, images of the Virgin Mary and to go to church and to be devout themselves. And it was basically like, oh, you were thinking of getting divorced? Oh, you've been sleeping with your boyfriend or girlfriend you're not married to? Stop doing that. That's how the demons are getting in. So they preyed upon people and preyed upon their insecurities. And this is why I said to remember the Perron family, because the case of the Perron family, which I believe is actually the inspiration for the first Conjuring film. So the Perron family, husband and wife, they had 5 daughters. And there's 2 versions of accounts here. One of the versions of accounts is that the wife, they move into this new home, and the wife, strange things start happening. She is starting to lose her grip. There's potentially a haunting. The wife is having this awful experience. They call in the Catholic Church. Eventually, Ed and Lorraine get involved, and they don't actually solve it. It doesn't stop. They had to stay living in that house until they could afford to leave it in, I think, 1980. The other version of this story is that the Perron husband was alcoholic and abusive, that the Perron wife was essentially a worn down, trampled upon, potentially, and of course this is alleged, I'm not saying this definitely happened, but the other version is that this is an incident of domestic violence, of someone being forced into the position of, housewife and mother to 5 children, that, living a life you didn't necessarily want. And essentially the Warrens come in and they're like, yeah, this awful experience that you're having, you're probably being gaslit. You maybe are suffering from, a trauma response. It's demons. It's definitely demons. So they were literally preying upon people's like unpleasant experiences, playing upon people's trauma, playing upon potentially someone's mental health going awry, and using it to back up their ideas, and also then using it to reinforce very conservative values.
And it's basically, it falls into like hot reading, where you know that there is a situation that is
yes,
maybe has the qualities that would be productive to this kind of,
Yeah.
things are going wrong in your life, this is why, and I have
Mhm.
the fix for it.
Mhm.
And I think especially in a lot of these situations where you do have families that are desperate, or
Yeah.
there's reasons why people are contemplating divorce or having
Mhm.
affairs, or things are
Mhm.
going wrong, perhaps because of economic reasons,
Mhm.
and someone comes along and says, I've got an
Yeah.
easy-ish fix for you,
But then they
and
didn't
it's
actually fix it. This is the thing.
well, yeah.
So this is the thing. A lot of the cases that Ed and Lorraine were involved in have no resolution. And just as well, to kind of like bring this up to why we're talking about it right now, I just have to mention this. Ed Warren was a piece of shit, man. Like, he
Oh,
allegedly,
any specific reason?
well, Ed Warren allegedly, and I say allegedly so that no one sues us, um, had an affair with someone for 20 years, actually moved that person into the Warrens' house. So not only was he having an extramarital affair, definitely not okay by particularly the Catholic Church's rules, his wife knew about it. It also started when the girl was 15 years old, and it went on for 20 years. So Ed Warren essentially moved an underage child into his house to have sex with him regularly.
I think we always have to
Um,
be suspicious where you have grown adults
yeah.
who are spending a lot of time, or like you say, moving people in who are either children themselves, or very young,
Mhm.
and a lot younger than them.
Mhm.
That's questionable in and of itself. But I think you often do find, especially in these kinds of religious communities that are quite conservative, that the men will have side chicks and
Yep.
the women will often be okay with it,
Yep. Yep.
um,
Exactly.
because they see themselves as fulfilling certain parts of the wifely
Yep.
duties,
And
and
there's
this
that
other
thing.
person is a way to do,
Yeah. And if you have built a career on being, you know, this perfect couple, this close knit couple who upholds these values and uses those values to literally cast evil out from the world, you can't turn
mm,
around and be like, he's an abusive wanker. Uh, excuse my language, but let's be honest, that's kind of what is implied, and the accounts that we have about Ed that this allegation comes from do paint him to be like that. So yeah, not great people. Because also like I know
and
like
the issue as well with when I say side chicks, I'm not talking about paedophilia or grooming. But when you do have issues like that, it's like that's fine as long as everyone is consenting.
yes.
If you as a married couple are happy for one or both of you to have affairs as consenting adults
Hmm.
with other consenting adults, that is your business. I don't care
Exactly.
about it. Not bothered. But the issue is when people make such a big deal of
Yeah.
morality, and
Hmm.
specifically Christian or any kind of religious values, and castigate others for living a life that
Yes.
they themselves
This
are
is the
not living.
thing. Like, not only is there a
Like,
massive power imbalance, it's fucking hypocritical as hell.
this exactly, and this happens all the time with, especially either religious leaders or politicians, where it will come out that they are
Hmm.
having an affair,
Hmm.
and you know ultimately it's not my business. You do you, whatever, as long as everyone is consenting. Hence the disclaimer about
Yeah,
I'm not talking
exactly.
about
We're not talking
paedophilia or cases
about,
of
yeah.
grooming, but it is an issue, and it becomes society's issue when
Yes.
you are going around spreading a message, or perhaps making
Hmm.
money and influencing people, when you are not living that life.
Exactly. Well, it's funny you should say that because Lorraine was a consultant for the Conjuring films up until
Yeah.
she died. So,
Oh
and
yeah,
she
yeah,
had stipulations, like they could not
yeah,
show people doing certain things, particularly
yeah.
the Ed and Lorraine characters. She is not she is not a victim in this really because she actively participated in it and then continued to do so well after Ed died. So the icky conservativeness about the Conjuring franchise is almost directly because of Lorraine. Like she is like the primary reason why they are the way that they are and have been shaped the way that they have been shaped. So yeah, that's the Warrens. But why are we talking about them when it comes to dark tourism? Now, it's not just because people go to places because the Warrens went there, because that's technically not a tourism industry. They did, however, open an occult museum in their home, which is apparently currently closed because of like border disputes or something. I think like who the land is owned by. But it was open for a really long time, and it includes things like Annabelle the doll, their case files, lots of other things that they've collected, lots of things with very unsubstantiated claims of being haunted or being demonic and all the other stuff. So they started this thing, and it's kind of like on the surface you're like, oh, okay, well, it's like a cabinet of curiosities. Cabinet of Curiosities, if you don't know, well, they've been around for a really long time, but I'd say they became famous in the Victorian era or the late Georgian. Like Walpole's wasn't a cabinet of curiosities, but it was a hell of a collection. Bigger than a cabinet. But a cabinet of curiosities was like, oh, this is the shriveled head of a demon, and this is bones of a saint, and this is thing from a ritual.
It would often be rich people being like, have a look at all of my macabre and occult stuff
that I stole from another country.
Yeah. That I stole or that I paid a lot of money for because I'm rich and need this shriveled hand and
a lot of it's fake.
This amulet.
A lot of it's hella fake, but it was very orientalist, like very imperialist, but which is why occult museums do ick me, because they are often massively blurring the lines between like tradition, religion, culture, and the occult, without any sensitivity. But that's kind of beside the point to this. It's part of it, but that's another conversation. So why have we brought Ed and Lorraine into this? So their occult museum, it paves the way. There are hundreds of museums like this now that really take advantage of people's fascination. And on the one hand, okay, like that's what museums are. But they go a bit too far in one way. And there's lots of examples I could have picked, but I've picked one that I think really crystallizes this, because this is also someone who has used and abused people's experiences to create his own celebrity. And that is Zach Baggins. Mary, do you want to explain who he is?
Well, I mean, TLDR, he's one of the lead ghost hunters / paranormal investigators on probably the most successful ghost hunting show of the 21st century. So obviously there are British ghost hunting shows.
Most Haunted.
But in America, but in America, it's been this massive boom for almost 20 years now. And at the forefront of this was a show called Ghost Adventures. And it was led by Zach and also Nick Groff, who has since left the show to do his own shows. I think Ghost Adventures is still going.
Yeah.
They've got like over 200 episodes and like I don't even know how many seasons, like a lot.
He also managed to keep it going during the pandemic.
Yeah, but the thing about ghost hunting shows, and especially in this kind of particular format, is they're relatively cheap. If you can afford the kind of ghost hunting technology and you've got the hosts or the the ghost hunters, and you need the crew who will go with you, sound, camera, whatever, and you've also got like the equipment, and you know someone who can edit quite well, and maybe a researcher, you might do the research, then it's not, production values wise, they're relatively cheap.
They're quite easy to make. And generally they're not paying the locations. This is one of the things, isn't it? Like, and this is why I've brought him into this situation, because oftentimes it was people asking to be on the show because they think they're having experiences of hauntings.
But also, just in the tourism kind of way, if you do have a kind of prison or a house that is open to the public, then of course you want this show. It's free publicity for you.
Yeah.
You can get on TV, and like I said, Ghost Adventures, massively successful.
Yeah,
It's
hugely
still
successful.
going. I think it started in the 2006 or 2008 maybe, and it spawned so many other shows that are just trying to be like Ghost Adventures,
Yes.
with their own kind of twist. But I mean,
Including,
Ghost Adventures is very much a bunch of lads
yes,
going to haunted places
yes.
and seeing if they can find ghosts.
And this is the show that BuzzFeed Unsolved is taking the piss out of. Like, Ghost Adventures is the template that Shane and Ryan are mimicking for BuzzFeed Unsolved and now Ghost Files. I obviously much prefer to watch Shane and Ryan, but the reason why BuzzFeed Unsolved happened and the reason why it worked is because Ghost Adventures and the shows like it that were inspired by it are so hugely popular that everybody recognized the format when that came out. Something has to be famous with a big cultural awareness for you to be able to successfully satire it. So he is another person, and I'm going to say it, he uses people's insecurities and traumas and their fears to boost his own celebrity and then just fucks off and leaves them to deal with it. He goes in and is like, oh my god, yeah, there's definitely a ghost in here. They want to kill you. Okay, bye. See you on the next episode. Like, he doesn't solve it. He just leaves them in there. He doubles down in convincing them that they have a haunting or a demonic experience because
I will
it's
say,
celebrity.
I have yet to see a ghost hunting show, and I do watch, watch quite a lot.
Yeah.
In the past, but I've yet to see any where they solve.
Oh yeah, and like supposedly
something.
get rid of it. But my issue with him in particular is that quite often he almost does more to convince the people whose house it is. A lot of ghost hunting shows, the people whose house it is aren't there. Or they're going to a location that is a haunted location. Because Ghost Adventures has been going on for so long, they're often just in someone's apartment or someone's house, and they're like, I think I might have a demon, and he's like, yeah, you do. Okay, bye. Like, he continues the narrative because it makes him more famous. And in 2017, in Las Vegas, he opened the Haunted Museum. He also made a reality show about it. So he did a reality show in 2016 that was all about him getting the stuff to open the Haunted Museum. So even before it opened, he had already made it about him and his celebrity. And even though it is technically called the Haunted Museum, it is Zach Baggins, the Haunted Museum. Like, it's kind of like when Tim Burton sticks his name at the front of everything. It's very much traded and marketed off being his museum. Guess how much tickets are to this museum, Mary?
Oh my gosh, are they like in the hundreds? I
So
can't even.
a standard ticket.
We're talking dollars, obviously. Yeah.
A standard ticket is $48. The
so
RIP All Access, where you get a tour guide, is $79.
When you say a tour guide, like a person
going
who
around
take
being
you
like,
on a
that
guided
item
tour.
is this. And if you go on the Haunted Flashlight tour, it's $199. Yeah. Now it's
what do you get? What do you get for that? What's that?
You get.
Do you get like is Zach the tour guide?
Well, I think you just go in on your own, but it's unrestricted access, so you can touch.
So you can touch all the stuff,
I guess.
Oh, see,
you're basically paying $200 to go in there unsupervised. But that means they're not doing any work.
Just aside from the other ethical issues that you have, there's also this idea of curation and keeping things in a condition as a museum, right? This is why there's lots of controversy around like Kim Kardashian wearing Marilyn Monroe's dress, because she's damaged it in such a way that it has irrevocably damaged the
Yeah.
item. And this is part of the problem with private collectors, where you don't have the same standards as museums, and therefore you can just loan it for money,
Yeah.
and there's no kind of
Yeah.
care for the actual item.
Yeah.
And what it means is that part of history is lost.
Yeah.
And just
And
on that note,
also,
I'm like, no, there should not be
yes,
unrestricted
exactly. And
museum
the
like tours
same,
or
yes,
whatever.
and the same reason that I had issues with Marilyn Monroe's dress, because it was continuing this narrative of Marilyn that Marilyn herself did not want. This museum is icky, man. It's icky. So, first of all, it's in a mansion that he claims was once the site of demonic rituals. Do you know why he claims that? He spoke to a woman who told him that when she was a teenager, she broke in and she saw evidence of satanic rituals.
Yeah, I
That's
buy
that.
it, sure.
Yeah, sure. Sounds real. So he actually sells the location itself as being like, on the website it says the location is like haunted in the site of like terrible rituals.
I will say, like, if I was going to make a spooky museum, I would want the location to be, a
100%.
selling point. But this is the issue between, is it haunted,
Yeah.
or is there something satanic and demonic
And
there?
also, is this a experience attraction like, say, the York Dungeons or the Tower of London, where you acknowledge that you're going to get a level of fiction and theatre, but you've called it museum? And that word has certain connotations. People are expecting a certain thing. So not only does he have things like the Dybbuk box, which we'll probably do an episode on at some point, because that's a great example of a constructed narrative. Lots of unsubstantiated, got it right that time, haunted items, such as a haunted mirror owned by Bela Lugosi, which is unsubstantiated, not just because no one knows if it's actually haunted, but no one actually knows if it was his, or if he had it before or after it was supposedly haunted. They also have a haunted mirror that was meant to be in possession of the captain of the Titanic, but before the Titanic, and also, again, was it haunted? No one knows. He also has some things, and this is where, for me, it crosses the line. He has Kevorkian's death fan, the controversial euthanasia doctor. He has fragments of Charles Manson's bones. He has the chair from the room where Michael Jackson died. He has Chris Farley's death picture, like literally blood coming out of his face. And he also has John Wayne Gacy's original artwork. So a very horrendous serial killer. This is where it crosses the line for me, because there's a difference between these things are supposedly haunted, because if you don't believe they're haunted, you don't believe they're haunted. If you do believe they're haunted, I still have issues with presenting something that does not have evidence to be haunted as being haunted, because you're making things up. That's not fair. You're taking advantage of people to make a profit. You're charging them $79 frickin' to lie to them about something. But you're also profiting off the bone fragments of a man who ordered horrendous murders and brainwashed a bunch of young women. You have the artwork of a serial killer. Like, ew. It's not okay. Like, you don't get to profit on that type of thing. And that's why I wanted to bring him in, because this is the ER on the end of that darker tourism. It's all about him and his individual celebrity and profiting on people's buying into his cult of celebrity and personality, which was facilitated by people like Ed and Lorraine. And it's exactly what they were doing. Like, I think they also had some stuff like this where it's like, there's a difference between presenting things that may or may not be haunted. It's like saints' relics. We know that a lot of saints' relics aren't actually saints' relics because saints did not have 16 fingers and toes.
AI would
I would disagree.
What this really reminds me of, though, is the trade in, I think, the medieval period, where you had everyone selling pieces of the Turin shroud and also pieces of wood from the cross that Jesus was crucified on. And there was so much kind of, so Turin's shroud was the death shroud that his body was wrapped in, supposedly, allegedly. It's a fake. But there was so much cloth and so much wood that it was like, well, we have like a field of crosses, and we have like a 5,000 tents worth of
Turin shroud.
This isn't real.
Exactly.
So it's that kind of like spying and selling and profiting off of
the 21st
what are fake artifacts.
It's the 21st century version of that like 14th century trade in saints artifacts and relics.
Yeah. But I think so 2 points. Like, one, I think it's very weird for anyone to collect memorabilia from serial killers. I think that is a massive red flag. And it's one thing to be interested in the macabre and in haunted spaces and ghosts, and to think that you are a ghost hunter, but what does like serial killer memorabilia have to do with any of that? And two, I think I am part of my current research is Dybbuk boxes, and I think that it's very, very like unethical to have this, and the whole kind of conversation surrounding the buying and selling, or the displaying Dybbuk boxes, and the mythology that comes around there, especially as a lot of it comes from people who aren't Jewish, and there's that idea of you're just appropriating other people's culture or other people's mythology and folklore, and it's not even just that like, oh, this is a demon and isn't this spooky, but it's like, this is not for you.
No. And it is also like Dybbuk boxes, have usually got something. They're a way of dealing with usually a trauma, or in the same way as a lot of these things. But I also think putting serial killer items alongside haunted items, supposedly, super problematic, because you are equating the two. And like Ed and Lorraine Warren would have said, well, they let the devil in. Like, that's the whole thing. I think it's The Conjuring 3 that's based on that case where the guy was like, the devil made me do it.
That's literally the title of the film, like, The Devil Made Me Do It.
And that's what he said, I think, in court. So there is an equation of that in terms of like morality, but also like when we were in Chicago and the guy was like, oh, we're going to stop off at this hotel and you can actually stay here, it's haunted, and we genuinely went and looked up how much it was to stay in that hotel, because we were like, this would be fun. It would be fun to stay in a supposedly haunted location.
There is I forget the name of it, the most haunted pub in York.
Yes.
And you can stay there, and like the Golden Fleece or something.
Yeah, we went there, didn't we?
We went there, but I actually am going there to stay at some point later this year for a nice little trip. But like, you can go and stay in these kinds of places.
And like, I love a supposedly haunted castle, or a supposedly haunted, and there is an element of like places like Conisbrough Castle, where 500, 600 years ago, terrible things did happen, and that's one of the reasons people think they're haunted. And we shouldn't be like, oh, just because it happened 600 years ago doesn't mean it can be dismissed, or the violence can be dismissed. But there's a difference between putting a haunted mirror in the same museum collection as serial killers' things. It's gross. I don't like it. And to kind of round this up, I think when we get the Gothic into this and we think about it through a Gothic lens, I think it's that thing of like the issue with not acknowledging the campness at the heart of the Gothic and the community at the heart of the Gothic, because Ed and Lorraine Warren, for example, the type of people, and we see this with the Conjuring films because Lorraine literally does this, use the Gothic and the Gothic's conventions to conservatize, to say to people, this is why you should not sin, this is why you should not do X, Y, and Z, this is why you should follow the church, follow the Bible, do things the way we think you should do them. But as time's gone on and people's fascination and interest with the supernatural and the occult and witchcraft, as we were saying in the first episode, has blended to include people from all aspects of the spectrum. People like us that are very skeptical, but are fascinated in the cultural aspects and how these things happen, people that genuinely believe in it and it's a very important part of their lives. Just because I don't believe that's right, it doesn't mean I can dismiss their faith. It's just making money, it's commercializing, it's taking advantage. It loses what makes the Gothic a wonderful combining force that brings people together and gives people a language to understand each other by, gives people a language to share knowledge and share caution and to convey trauma and tragedy across the ages. And it just becomes some guy using other people's tragedies and other people's beliefs to fuel his own bank account and his own Twitter following.
And I think this is what we've been talking about a lot in these episodes, is that often at the heart of these stories, of these documentaries, of these films, podcasts, and anything, there are real cases of crime and trauma at the heart of them.
Yeah,
And sometimes
exactly.
that gets lost.
Yeah, exactly. So that is our episode on darker tourism. On the one hand, real fun. On the other hand, real not fun. But I think, you know, it was a good place to end this little mini series on. I think we are going to kind of still, we're going to rotate around this, we're going to orbit this planet for a little bit longer. We've got a little mini episode about an unsolved mystery coming up. We had a really great, interesting comment on our YouTube. So I am going to return to Ouija boards, which we talked about in our ghost hunting episode. I'm going to do an episode on Ouija boards, and I do really think we should do a Dybbuk box episode because you are researching it right now, and it's really interesting. And they literally made a horror film about one last year, I think. So
there's so many. There's actually, well, I say so many. There's not so many, but I actually just watched Attachment
yes.
last week, finally, and it is a queer Jewish horror story about a Dybbuk. So yeah.
Cool. Well, in the meantime, if you want to find more of us, you can follow us on Twitter and at Instagram at the Ghoul Guides. You can obviously like and subscribe. If you would like to support us and support us in making more content, you can head over to our Ko-fi and you can donate. Obviously, don't feel you have to. Tell a friend to tell a friend. Keep the association growing. And of course, if there are other episodes you'd like us to do, please let us know. And in the meantime, stay safe and stay spooky.
Stay safe and stay spooky.
Bye.